welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. Whilst we battle bitter temperatures here in the UK, we're determined to make your heart sing. And joining me today is a man who would no doubt be very popular in prison. It's John.
I'm popular everywhere.
That's true.
I don't need to be incarcerated in order to be popular. Oh, thank you very much. I don't think anybody's ever told me that before. Yeah, you've got a good face for prison.
I was just thinking that, the dark green scrubs they had on in this, you would really suit that kind of...
Oh, yeah. I did set off my eyes quite nicely, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. I'm cold. It's fairly miserable. That we don't normally mention it, but the light quality is bloody awful at the moment. It's just so dull and but yeah, we are sort of in the middle of winter and in the middle of a cold snap. So yeah, it's a case of staying in and watching lots of things on television if possible, and occasionally having to venture out into it, but not very often, thank you. So how are you anyway? You all right?
Really good, yes. Basically living under my electric blanket at the moment and only venturing out for emergencies, i.e. we've run out of tea. That's the only reason why I would leave the house. I did start off this week going, I'm going to go for walks every day and it's going to be nice and crisp and cold, and I nearly decked it 3 times on black ice on one walk. So I was like, I think this is a sign from the universe just to go back home.
Yeah, it probably is. I saw some of your posts. I think it was on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
There's a post of you, hashtag winter walk.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Didn't mention the near-death experience because I got a really nice picture of sunrise basically at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, but yes, nearly died apart from that. But yeah, looking forward to chatting about this film. I think there's lots to unpick. So
absolutely.
Today we are talking about Sing Sing, which is the 2024 film from Greg Quidar.
To die, to sleep, to dream.
This is a clemency hearing for your conviction, 25 to life. Since you've been in custody, you've been involved in a theater program.
Gentlemen, let's go. It's been a program that was established to help people get more in touch with their feelings and truly get some rehabilitation.
I am Gladiator Goliath. I am Spartacus.
I'm Prince Hamlet of Denmark.
And it's turned into something, wonderful.
What part do you play?
From time to time I do act, like we all do.
So are you acting at all during this interview?
Basically, the plot is that John Devine G. Whitfield, who's played by Coleman Domingo, finds himself incarcerated at the maximum security prison Sing Sing for a crime that he did not commit. He finds strength and purpose through the Rehabilitation Through the Arts programme, also known as the RTA, and he uses the emotions generated in this drama class to cope with the tragedy of his real life, essentially, the life that he had before prison and the life that he sort of tried to build for himself inside Sing Sing. So this has obviously created a lot of awards buzz, Coleman Domingo in particular, receiving a lot of nominations for Best Actor. What were your expectations going in? Because I don't really know much of his work. He always looks flawless on the red carpet and he has incredible style, but I've not actually seen much of Coleman Domingo's work. So what were you kind of hoping for going into this?
I did have a few expectations based on the fact I've seen interviews with Coleman Domingo, probably to promote this film, I think a couple of months ago, and he comes across as being this super confident actor who he seems very at ease in no matter what situation he is in. So I was kind of thinking, yeah, it'd be quite interesting. I hadn't seen a lot of his work, to be perfectly honest, but I didn't really... On paper, it doesn't sound like a great film, to be perfectly honest. A rehabilitation drama in a prison where a guy who is innocent, in fact, it kind of sounds like Shawshank Redemption, to be honest, more than anything else. I didn't actually do it. So expectations were low to middling. I thought I'd kind of seen this type of thing before, where people find purpose through an activity, shall we say, rather than anything else. But I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the film. But yes, we will get into it. in more depth. What about you? What were your expectations?
Well, I had seen the trailer and I thought this looks interesting because it's the clip of them in the drama class where they're saying like, I'm Spartacus or I'm Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm sort of intrigued by this. And yeah, every time I've seen Colman Domingo on a talk show, he has been so effortlessly charismatic that I thought I would really love to actually see some of his work. But I don't think it got a massive release in the UK, or if it did, I completely missed it, which would surprise nobody. So was looking forward to watching it, but just didn't quite know what to expect. I was worried it was going to be a bit schmaltzy, but I don't think it did that at all. One of the things that did strike me though is that the film is actually shot in decommissioned prisons and obviously uses the talents of essentially non-actors from the RTA programme, which totally changed the way I saw the film. Did you know that going in, or was that kind of a surprise at the end for you?
I had heard an interview with Colman Domingo where he was talking about it, and he did mention that the majority of the actors were former inmates who'd been part of the programme. So I did know about it, but it still came as a real surprise as to the quality of the performances from these guys, because they were very naturalistic. They came across as being, I mean, that's when you get a wooden actor, you know that they're forcing the lines out. Acting, they're doing all the acting, and it doesn't work because it's not natural. But these guys, it was as if they were just sitting about talking and discussing things and joking and then rehearsing and all this sort of stuff. So it came across really, really well. I thought it was surprising.
Yeah, I definitely wonder what it was like for a lot of those actors to go, even though they're obviously decommissioned prisons. I did wonder how it would feel to go back into a situation like that, where it probably would feel quite enclosed and quite traumatic, perhaps, go back into that situation. But I thought the cast were absolutely incredible, and I was quite shocked to realise that obviously these were real men from this programme. We'll obviously go on to performance, but Clarence Macklin in particular, whose Divine Eye really stood out to me as being incredibly natural. In fact, to the point where I went on IMDb going, I know his face from somewhere, thinking I'd seen him in a different film. But it's purely been from promo for this, because he is obviously part of the RTA programme. But I just thought it was incredible. And also, it really gives a sense of ownership throughout the film as well. Like, these men obviously have lived this experience, and this was they've gone sort of great lengths to state how much this was a sort of like a living wage film. Everybody has like a piece of the pie, as it were, so they've all got kind of shares in it, so they do really own it. And I think that does bring a different type of experience to the way that you watch it as well, because it's not a documentary, it's not a straightforward drama. There's something more to it, I think, than just your kind of standard what could be seen as sort of Oscar bait, but obviously has a different kind of level to it. Colman Domingo obviously has been nominated, I think, for the Best Actor Oscar, and has won several awards already for his performance in this. What did you think? How do you think he interacted with the rest of the cast? What did you think of him as the sort of lead in it? I was kind of blown away by him, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it was a very nuanced performance from Colman Domingo, because there's a couple of different ways you can go when you're talking about these sort of prison style dramas and the way that inmates react to their situation. And he used his natural ability in acting, because the part he was playing was somebody who came from an acting background initially. It was like song and dance, and he talked about doing ballet and modern dance and things like that. So he had that sort of background, and the character of Divine G, he used his skills in those sort of way in order to interact with the other inmates. He was always talkative. He was always not bubbly, I would say, but he was at the heart of everything that they were talking about. And he was obviously a very smart man, because there was talk of him actually writing plays and everything as well. So he was somebody that they kind of looked up to, but he didn't force himself onto the group as being a leader. It was all very democratic. Everybody had a part. They had a steering group, for instance, that they all discussed about bringing in new members. That was one of the earlier scenes, and in that he was the one that had the bit of paper and he was saying, what about this person? But then he would say, right, and somebody would nominate them and they would say, well, no, you tell me why. It wasn't, well, I think. It was all very much, tell me why we should have this person in here. What are the qualities that you're seeing in them and all this sort of stuff. So it was all very democratic, the way. And that was his coping mechanism for living in prison, I think, to try and keep himself sane. He would be in as many programs as he could possibly be, because that was mentioned at one point that it wasn't just the arts program he was involved in. He was doing an awful lot of stuff. I would imagine some would be like creative writing and all sorts of things like that. But yes, it was a performance that was sort of tamped down a bit. So it was never over the top. So when there were moments of real dramatic tension and his performance rose to that, it had more impact because he was kind of like keeping it at a level. And you kind of felt that if he didn't do that sort of consciously, he would have done something a long time ago, like out of frustration more than anything else, because he was there and he was there unjustly. But yeah, I thought it was amazing, and I'm not surprised that he's getting nominations right across the board for his performances. It was just wonderful.
Yeah, I definitely think that you saw his character come to life on the. Obviously, the film opens with him reciting Shakespeare, and you really get to see how he is as a performer. But I just thought he was such an interesting character in the sense that he'd obviously been in prison for a long time, and you never really got a sense of how he first established himself in prison, because by the time we meet him, he's almost like, I don't want to say a father figure, but he sort of looks after other inmates, and even like Divine Eye, who obviously is up for parole, and he's like, well, if you don't mind, I've looked into your case and I can help you. And he obviously pulls together a lot of documents for him. And when we get the glimpse inside his cell, his is stacked with books. Everybody else has like food or pictures or something else they can use as sort of currency, whereas his is, his solace essentially, because he's got all of his writing and stuff that you can read there. So I thought it was really layered and really selfless as well, I guess, because I suppose he could have gone into this being like, well, I am the capital A actor, the professional, but he didn't ever make it about him. There was definitely, everybody else had the chance to sort of breathe and sort of play their part, as it were, and also just really intense. There are moments of extreme close-up. I'm thinking of when he's like facing his parole board, and the camera must be like inches from his face, and you can read everything that man is thinking just by like a sort of a smile that's struggling to hold, or sort of his eyes kind of filling up. I was really, really blown away by it. I thought, again, it's one of those performances that maybe in the hands of somebody else could have been too over the top or too cliched, but he really plays it sort of, not subtly, but just sort of, he kind of goes with the flow of prison life. And I think he does feel like part of that crew. And obviously there is quite a large supporting cast, because we do get to see inmates who have been through this RTA program. What did you think of the cast in particular? And like, did your opinions change of some of the characters as you were going along sort of watching this? Because it is quite a boisterous group of men who presumably are being quite ballsy and doing drama in a prison setting, but nonetheless seem really like they cared about it.
Yeah, it was a real mix of people. Obviously, it was all men as well, so there was a lot of sort of macho intensity there as well, especially with the likes of Divine Eye more than anything else. But they subtly developed each of the characters in their own way, because they were introduced with their auditions more than anything else. They were
which I thought was really interesting.
Apparently, those auditions were the actual audition tapes that they used to get the parts in the film.
Wow.
So they reused those because they were very good. And the way that they'd obviously been told, right, you're auditioning for this part, but you're not like totally a confident actor here. You're being yourself, you're under pressure. And you could see the difference between all the various inmates. They were not professional actors when they were doing this audition. Some of them were stuttering and stumbling. Some of them, it was just kind of monotonous the way they were sort of delivering the lines. And that changed over the course of the film, as you saw, that because they followed the craft. They followed the process. That's what it was all about. It was the process. And you could see the process working on each and every one of them in the way that they developed and changed as part of the preparation for the show. And I thought that was excellent the way they did that. So you're showing the change in a person through the change in how they're interpreting their character. None more so than Divine Eye, the way that he changed when he was doing his Hamlet soliloquy, and he was stumbling at first, and he was doing it just in this monotone, and he was confrontational about it because he was saying, why do I need to do it again? That was fine, that was okay. And he was saying, no, trust the process, do it again, try this, try that. It's all part of it. You will find something else in there. It may take time, but you have to trust it. And that, again, reflected how he changed over the course of the film, because there was a way, it was almost right at the start when the Divine G talked to him for the first time. Divine Eye said, oh no, wait a minute, I've got a bit of business to do. And then he went and hassled somebody, threatened their life because of drugs, and then came back. So that was almost a confrontational situation right at the start. And it was partly done so that Divine Eye was almost imposing himself as a leader, because he's this hard drug dealer, basically the sort of the alpha dog, one of the main men in there in terms of the drug scene in prison. So he was almost imposing himself on these guys, and the way that they reacted to him they didn't try and match his energy or be completely subservient. They kind of pitched it somewhere in the middle and just kept it very neutral. So therefore it kind of diffused the situation, and that was very clever, the way they did that. And I thought it's a nice way to introduce how characters address situations. And I thought, we're going to get more of this through the film, and I wasn't disappointed because there was a lot more that was actually involved in it.
Yeah, I definitely thought that Divine Eye, when we first saw him, I was like, he's going to be disruptive. He's going to ruin this class. He's going to, because he had a knife in his waistband and stuff like that, which obviously Divine G sort of pulls him up for and says this isn't the space for that. And there's also that kind of beautiful moment where he is struggling with the soliloquy and he starts to get really frustrated at Brent, who is the sort of facilitator for the drama class. And I believe it's Sean Dino Johnson who gets, and he's quite a big guy, like as in physically quite imposing, and he gets really teary and is like, no, I know that violence that you're feeling and I've left that behind. And I just thought it was such a remarkable moment that, you don't imagine that they'd be so invested in this drama class, but you can see how much it means to them. And even the drama exercises where, for example, they all have to go around the room and say like what their favourite place was that they've imagined, and you just learn a little bit about those characters, because there's Carmine, who kind of looks like he's just stepped out The Sopranos, and he's talking about taking his wife for a picnic in Prospect Park, and then Divine G talks about going to getting money off his mum to go to buy ice cream on a hot day, and Divine Eye actually says watching his children grow, which he obviously is not getting to do from Sing Sing. So I thought that there was lovely little sort of pockets of information that you got that weren't like cheesy or anything like that. They were part of this drama room process that they were all doing. So I thought it was really nice how they introduced sort of different layers to the character that allowed you to get to know them in a way that wasn't, you didn't just see them as the prison drug dealer or alpha dog or whatever it was, or the sort of elder statesman. It let you see all these different kind of layers to them, which I thought was just such a lovely touch, especially because obviously, as I say, these are the real people that are doing this. How do you think the film balances the portrayal of prison life with the sort of hope within the RTA? Because I think what struck me is that we get this beautiful opening soliloquy from Divine G, and then minutes later he's on the ground with his arms behind his back because there's some sort of siren going on in the prison, and then they're lined up against the wall. Do you feel like you got the kind of balance between what it actually felt like to be trapped in this building versus the freedom he found within the classroom?
Yeah, definitely, because the opening scene, like you say, you see Divine G basically from the back and the whole cast, and they've obviously done, I think it's A Midsummer Night's Dream, and you see part of the the backing, which is like kind of paper and stuff like that, and the spotlights are down on them, and you see them from behind, and you hear the crowd cheering, and then it cuts almost immediately to them all standing in a long corridor, being shouted at by guards, and it just contrasts the two elements of it, sort of the highs of being appreciated for what you've done and then just treated as a number. And that's emphasized quite a lot because you see his cell and it's like B 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, all these wee cells, and you've just got numbers. So they are pretty much just treated as like a piece of meat more than anything else that has to be controlled. And and I did like the fact that, you know, he was out in the prison yard, and then suddenly the siren goes off and they know exactly what they have to do. They have to hit the ground. Otherwise, there's a chance they're going to get shot from a guard in the tower because it's a breakout. It could just be a drill. You just don't know. There was never explained what the sound actually meant, but you knew as an audience member that it wasn't a good thing when all these tough guys hit the deck with their arms spread out. You know, the sort of the cross pose. It's just, it really gave you a good idea of the situation they're living in and why the RTA program was so essential to them, because it gave them something that was theirs and something that they could use to work out their feelings and actually talk to other people. Not so much about what their feelings were, they would do that as part of their character that they were actually developing as well. But it meant they were in almost like a safe space, because all the time when they were doing all the rehearsals and everything, they were in this massive hall and they were in a circle, and it was quite an intimate circle within this massive big space, but you never saw any guards or anything there. There wasn't guards at the doors or anything. They were just left to it because obviously they couldn't get out of the place, because just out of camera shot there would be, you know, a guard somewhere. So there was always that presence, but it didn't allow the presence to actually interfere with what they were doing, which I thought was really nice. So it was almost like a safe space. Now, you've got to remember, none of these guys are nice guys. They're in a maximum security prison for a reason.
I was going to say,
probably for a couple.
So,
you can only sympathise with them so much. And to be fair, a lot of them didn't moan and complain about being incarcerated. It's, you know, a hazard of their job that they have obviously undertaken, and they're bad guys. Even Divine G, he was a drug dealer and he was obviously mixed up in like bad stuff anyway, even if he was not guilty of a crime. I think it was a murder charge. There were other things that were actually there as well. So he wasn't just this random guy who had been wrongly accused. He obviously did live the life for a while, and he totally acknowledged that as well. But it meant that the whole environment and the people, it changed the way that they actually were, which was really nice. I thought it was a really nice contrast.
Yeah, I definitely think there was a couple of really beautiful shots when you see Divine G and Mike talking to each other. They're obviously next door to each other in their cells, and you get that kind of shot through the little slit of glass. And you see how cramped the space is, and they're kind of sitting, not quite fetal position, but like sort of tucked up within themselves in their cells. And then you get the lovely contrast of the wide open space of this drama room, which, as you say, is almost kind of set up like sort of group therapy. And even when I think it's Divine G sort of coaching Divine I on his Hamlet, and he's going, "What do you feel right now?" And he says, "Anger." And he goes, "No, that's too easy." He's like, "Show me hurt, because that's what's buried." And they were really talking out their emotions through their characters. And to me, it seemed kind of incredible that they had this beautiful big room in which to express themselves freely. And then, as you see, sort of seconds later, they're just a number again. And that must have been, for those guys, such a huge contrast to understand, like, why in this room you can be yourself and express yourself and, you know, have all these feelings and share all this experience with other people. And then the minute you get back into the canteen, for example, it's don't look at anyone while you're eating in case you accidentally start a fight sort of thing. There's this, it's always like they're kind of teetering on the brink of, they've got this very scary real world out there, i.e. in the rest of the prison. And then this one room is like this really magnificent sort of, as you say, it's kind of safe space, almost like a sort of group therapy kind of situation, which is obviously the saving grace for a lot of them. But as much as, Divine G obviously is, he believes he has evidence that proves he is innocent of the crime that he is in prison for, I do feel like the film is kind of pointing to sort of bigger issues within the justice system. Do you think it does this quite well without being preachy? Or sort of how do you kind of follow all those different stories of, Divine I, Mike, Dino, Carmine, all that? How do you sort of follow all those stories and think, yeah, this is a fair and accurate portrayal of what it must be like? Or do you think it's kind of pointing to, we have a problem with the way that our sort of prisoners are treated or the way the parole system works? I do feel like there was a kind of message in there somewhere.
Yeah, it does point quite vocally towards the fact that not everything works in terms of rehabilitation within the prison system. When Divine G's in his parole hearing, about 3/4 of the way through the film, the chair of the parole board mentions that the RTA is a very good programme. And what I took from that was there are an awful lot of programmes there that do not work whatsoever. They have tried and failed for whatever reason. So it can be a bit hit and miss, if you like, in terms of what works and what doesn't. And the whole point of rehabilitation is to try and make sure that somebody doesn't do the same thing or a similar thing again. They become a member of society. Now, going through the arts route has proven to work because it makes people think more about what they do, how they do it, how they apply themselves, how people see a persona as well, because basically all of these guys have personas. They're all hard men. They have front about them. So it's how they can use that for good and not just fall back into the same routine that they were in before. So yes, it does speak to that, and it does speak to the fact that prisons are overcrowded, because look at the rooms. They were in tiny wee rooms. They weren't even square. They weren't even rectangular. They were angled as well to fit in the maximum number of rooms that you can possibly have. So there was all that as well. So it was talking about the way that the system actually operates, and the fact that there's a recognition that just locking people up doesn't do the job. They have to have something that prepares them for going back into the world, and not just so that they go out and do exactly the same thing again and again and again, because that's what happens, really, isn't it? A lot of the time when you don't have these programs. Now, a lot of people say that's a waste of money because it's people who deserve to be locked up. Yes, they do deserve to be locked up, but should they be given the opportunity to try and do better
and break the cycle? Because Coleman Domingo himself has said that the recidivism rates of people that go through the RTA program is 3%, as opposed to 60% of people who don't go through these kind of programs in prison. So it is that's quite an astonishing stat. I thought that there was a couple of scenes in particular. So the scene where obviously Divine G is going for his sort of hearing, and the woman in charge of the panel says that he's exhausted all of his options. He's been through his appeal process, he's been through a sort of wrongful conviction process as well. He said outside parties coming in to look at it, and I just thought that is, that must be so demoralizing. And then even when he does have this kind of what he considers key evidence, a person on tape saying it was me that did it, it's, well, we can't verify it because the person's dead. And I just thought that a weaker person would have, really done something irreversible at that point, because there maybe was a chance that he just wasn't getting out. So I thought the system doesn't seem set up to take in new information, which seems odd, because obviously with advances in presumably even things like DNA, because he had been in prison for 20 odd years, that would have been taken into consideration, and yet it wasn't. And she kind of made the sort of remark about, well, are you acting now? And I thought, that's just shitty behaviour. That's not even professional in the slightest. And then there was the scene where Divine I said that his son had ended up in prison as well. And I thought that it's just such a heartbreaking cycle of, he talks about because he was the kind of kingpin on the outside, they treated his son the same way. So of course he's ended up in the exact same situation because he's just inherited like the empire maybe that his dad had built up. And I just thought the sort of cyclical nature of everything was so sad as well, because it was a lot of the guys were actually older, and there was a suggestion that they'd been in there, you know, for significant periods of time. Obviously they've had a conviction at some point. I'm not saying that they're all completely innocent, but it did just make me think that this drama class or this RTA program that is teaching men how to communicate and communicate their feelings, which is just sort of unheard of within these kind of like crime gangs or whatever, is doing so much more to help these men, because ultimately when they get released, or if they get released and they're back on the outside, you know, some of these men won't have seen like a mobile phone or the internet or any of these things, and that in itself would be overload. So even just having the facility to communicate your emotions would make such a difference. So I did think it was really, really interesting. As I say, I think that, again, maybe a different director, different cast, it could have been quite schmaltzy, it could have been quite obvious Oscar bait, but I do think it's quite fair in its approach to tackling these kind of bigger issues. And I do think it kind of imbues hope. Like the sort of tagline is this whole trust the process. Did you sort of feel that as well when you were watching it, that you actually felt quite hopeful for these characters, that they were somehow learning and developing how to emote primarily?
Oh, you could see that they were, just through the change in the way that their characterizations, whether it was a cowboy or a gladiator or whatever, you know, there was
a mummy.
A mummy. Things, yes. Yeah. So you could see that they were developing as people as well as developing their characters, and it was something that they could hold on to. It was something physical that they had, and it showed them that it wasn't just the four walls that they were staring at each day. They were of value more than anything else, and that was part of the process as well, to show these people that they were actually valued and they could actually do something. Yes, they were probably bloody horrible folk when they were outside, but they are capable of change, and they're capable of being relevant as well. And that all came through with, especially when you saw them all and they were like dressed up and everything, you know, getting ready for the performance, and they all had their own wee process about how to approach their roles, their last minute things and all that. And I thought it was all really, really nicely done. And it did get that point across that these people, initially they would have been treated as a problem, and the problem was just put away in a box, but they are able to sort of have some sort of self identity about them, more than just being a number. They're somebody who is part of a collective as well. So it does all make a difference to a person if you have a community around you. You know yourself, having a community around you, especially when the last couple of years we've been spending so much time at home, it's the people that you interact with, whether it's online or whether it's through social media platforms, even the toxic ones. At least this company, you know.
That's true.
But yes, it all counts, and that's what part of the program actually was about. It wasn't so much about getting a performance out there. It was developing yourself, where you're in a situation that it's difficult to develop in any way at all, because it's just the monotony of, you know, having a meal, going into the yard, maybe doing some sort of job, that kind of thing, because you didn't see them doing anything else apart from the acting. Now, they must have had other things that they were doing as well. That wouldn't have been a full-time occupation, if you like.
No, because I think somebody mentions early on that there's a history class, and it makes me think that they had gone to it, like they'd actually joined in it. So I do think there's obviously, there is a whole life in that prison that you obviously don't get to see, because this is just a small portion of it. But I did think it was interesting how it sort of, everybody was sort of accountable for example, learning their lines. So if you don't learn your lines, it annoys everybody else, because then they have to wait. Or even things like turning up to rehearsal, because obviously Divine G kind of goes AWOL for a while and decides that it's not for him. But learning how to sort of use the scenery and the costumes, it's all about, as you say, being part of this networking community. And there was almost a kind of childlike joy in a lot of them when things really came together, or their ideas were listened to, and you kind of got the impression that maybe they weren't listened to as part of the general prison population, or even sort of in their life outside. They were maybe just a cog in a bigger machine, and so to feel that, as you say, that kind of value and imposing that sort of self-worth on people, I don't think it can be underestimated how much that would give somebody hope. I'm not saying that hope that they would get out, because obviously, as I say, those with kind of lengthier prison sentences were obviously going through their own process, but it is quite a strangely hopeful film in that sense, and that you sort of see them forming this little community with each other.
Yeah, they're obviously the whole parole sequence for Divine G. There is a mirror there with what he's saying about the Hamlet soliloquy when he's talking to him. He's saying, "Don't use anger. Use what was it he said? It was hurt rather than anger." Now, when he is being interviewed as part of this parole hearing and he is getting turned down, you can see the anger starting, and then it changes to hurt actually on his face, and the way that he's slightly shaking and his eyes are watering, but there's no tears like streaming down his face or anything, because he knows that will not go well. That just I'll just reinforce what the parole board think of him as, and he was acting the whole time, where obviously he wasn't. It was fairly genuine, because you realise that through his actions previously, what he's really like and what he's like when he's acting, it's very, very different. So the fact that he used the same sort of techniques that he was telling other people to use, I found that to be really interesting, that sort of callback to that. And he knew that if he had any sort of outburst during that, it would do him no good whatsoever. He may feel good for 15, 20 seconds, but that could damage him in a year's time when he's applying again, because they will remember that will be noted. Inmates subject to outbursts, perhaps not ready to be rehabilitated, that kind of idea. So he had to control himself. I thought it was excellent. It was probably the sort of the biggest piece of acting, if you like, in the whole film, and it just kind of blew me away. I just thought, that's absolutely fantastic. But the fact that it drew on information that they talked about earlier made it all the more significant. And when it clicked with me, I was going, I get that. I get why that previous scene was there. Yeah.
A very different audience, obviously, for him, because despite the fact that he is face to face with these parole officers, they are sort of faceless bureaucrats. They're just there to tick a few boxes and say either yes or no. So that was a moment of real control for him, and you almost kind of felt proud of him in that moment as well, that he hadn't succumbed to what would be the most natural response, i.e. blown a gasket, because they're not frigging listening to the fact that he's got new evidence and all this sort of thing. And it's a really kind of sort of masterful kind of moment of acting from Domingo, but also from Divine G as well. There's kind of layers to that there.
I always find it interesting where you have actors playing a part and the part is actually playing another part as well. The actors are acting. I find that really interesting, the way that they approach that and separate the two entities. It's always fascinating how they come up with the different ways so they can separate it, and so it's obvious that they've separated it as well, and that's obviously something that's quite clever. It's not something easy to do. I would imagine it would be very difficult to be two, have two sort of headspaces rather than just one, or three headspaces rather than two. So your natural self, your actor, and then the acting as well. It's just
it's sort of like Naomi Watts in Mulholland Drive, that kind of thing, where she's obviously proceeding it. It's that, and there is a clear line between when sort of Coleman Domingo's being Divine G and when he's being Divine G acting as well, and I think that is all marked out quite nicely. But you're right, that must be there's so much more to it than just pretending you can't read a script or you're not sure about something. There's all these different layers that sort of go into it. And in that sense, I think that the film's it's not a Shawshank. It's not your sort of typical kind of redemption, rehabilitation story. And I think that's probably what makes it much more interesting than, as you say, the premise of it doesn't sound brand new, but I think it does something quite different with this particular subgenre, I suppose.
Yeah, it definitely does, yeah.
Which I think is what is going to obviously when it hits flowers. I would love to see them all sort of on the red carpet, and actually I would love to just see their reactions and sort of soaking all that in, because that's kind of the ultimate performance, isn't it? Is actually being in front of all these cameras. So I think that would be fascinating to see. One thing I did note was that the director, Greg Queeder, hope I'm saying that properly, actually comes from a documentary background, and this is only his second feature film. I think that's quite evident in the way this film is shot, but in a way that works.
Yes, yeah, definitely. He was looking for a documentary subject to actually do as his next film. I think it was the same interview that Coleman Domingo was on, and it was him, and he was saying, yeah, I was looking for a subject, and he was put onto this the RTA program. He'd read something about, somebody had given him an article, and he read about it, and then he said, oh, somebody must have already done that. It's a documentary. And found that it hadn't really been done at all. It had kind of been touched on a couple of times, but they hadn't actually done any sort of feature-length documentary. But when he actually got into it, he realised it would make a far better drama than it would a documentary, because of the way that you can change things. It's not just going to be a series of talking heads. Then it can involve performance work, and it can involve people developing, throughout the film as actors and working out their issues and everything. So it was more of that. So he felt it was a better project to do like that. And yeah, I know what you mean, that it does appear to be quite documentary style in a lot of it, the way that it's shot. For instance, there is an awful lot of handheld camera work in there, and
sort of straight to camera delivery as well.
Yeah, and it's very close up in a lot of instances. They mix that up as well, and they make quite intimate spaces from spaces that are not, like, for instance, we were talking earlier on about Divine G and Mike talking, and they're in two separate rooms, but it's filmed in such a way that it's almost like a standard two shot. So if you didn't know any better, if you just saw that scene in isolation, you would think that's just two people sitting in a room. Yeah, fair enough, in maybe a prison cell, but it's two people sitting in their bunks, and they're almost talking directly to each other, the way that the camera actually flicks between the two. It's only when it draws out and you actually see, wait a minute, these rooms are completely separate.
Yeah.
So that is all part of the technique, the filming technique as well, which kind of, it makes it a little different from a documentary, but you can see that it definitely does come from that sort of background.
Yeah, I thought that really added to it as well. And again, of course, you've got, as I say, the sort of real life locations and the real life people actually doing it. So actually his style really suited that, because it wasn't sort of like dramatic sweeping shots of everybody sort of filing downstairs. There was a couple of sort of classic kind of prison shots, i.e. you get to see the sort of spiral staircase and a couple of yard shots, but it wasn't filmed in a sort of cinematic way. And I felt that closeness to the subject and the intensity of, as you say, the sort of handheld kind of pieces really, really brought this story to life in a way that felt different, but really fresh as well. So I really kind of appreciated the fact that he didn't entirely ditch his sort of not past, but like sort of previous style of work in order to bring this story to life. It would have been totally different, obviously, as a documentary, and the fact that you're kind of in the heart of these circles, because there's a lot of really gorgeous shots, in particular when the men are all sitting in the circle and then the camera just really slowly pans around all of their faces while they're talking, and you get that sort of beautiful kind of emotional connection that you maybe wouldn't have got from documentaries, because documentaries can sometimes feel a bit cold, whereas this really puts you right in the middle of it. Yeah,
with a documentary, well, by its very name, you're documenting, you're not stylizing, so it does come across as being a bit colder, a bit more normal, and it's not cut in the same way that you would cut a feature film, a narrative feature. So yeah, you can have these touches with the camera playing about in a circle, and like when Divine Eye perfects his Hamlet, he walks around each of them in a circle. He's at the back of them, which is quite profound as well at the same time, because that was one of the lessons he learned earlier on about people walking behind him on stage. And the way they did that was very telling, because it's drama and it's building up and it's slow, and it's just focused directly on him. You're just seeing the heads of everybody else. And I thought that was really, really wonderful, because your focus is entirely on him and what his performance as Hamlet is. And it's worked so well, because you felt that he really got the part at that point, and it was like just an affirmation of the process, if you like.
Yeah, I think that was one of my favourite scenes, actually, because he also is really playful with it. Like, he gets to the end of that really long soliloquy, then he goes, perchance line, and you can tell that he's taking the piss, but they're all like really, like, everyone's so uproarious with him because they're like, he's got it, he actually really understands what this part is. Did you have any sort of favourite kind of standout scenes like that where you just thought, this is exactly what this film's about?
Well, I previously mentioned one where there was interaction between Divine G and Mike, that intimate conversation.
Gorgeous shot.
Yeah, it was really, and it was like really nicely lit and everything. There was this kind of like soft yellows, because that's sort of the harsh light. That's the lighting that they had in the room. I'm sure it's on a Dulux chart somewhere. So I did like that, and I did like the sort of behind the scenes element when they were doing the dress rehearsal. So it was they were on stage, but there wasn't an audience, and it was how each of them were doing their preparations in order to get ready. Some of them were like reciting lines, some had just been very quiet and being out of the way and just, you know, being in their own head, making sure that they had the lines. And I thought that was really nice, because that showed their commitment to the whole process. They were treating it very, very seriously, because this is the only thing that's good that they have. So they want to make sure that they are doing their part within the collective. They're you know, because that's what it is. That's what an acting troupe is, as a collective. So therefore they want to make sure that they don't let down anybody else. And it's all the wee preparations that they're doing. I thought that was really wonderful, because that was like a handheld camera, and it just sort of swept in and out of them as they were talking, and you would catch wee snatches of conversations, and the director coming in and saying, you know, like, good luck and all that, you know, you've got this. And then eventually it goes round to Divine G, and he at that point has just been through his parole hearing, and there's been another issue as well. So he is really at a kind of a low point, and without him actually needing to say anything or even do anything, it's just the stance that he's got. He's standing there, he's got the back against the wall, and he's fairly rigid, and you think, this is not a good look for anybody, never mind somebody who's incarcerated. So, and that really sets up that whole scene that comes on after that. But it's just that build up. I thought that was an excellent wee scene. Yourself?
Yeah, that's a fantastic scene. I also just really loved the scene where before he goes to his parole hearing, he's on the phone to his mum, and you don't get to hear what she's saying, obviously, but he's confident enough that he's saying, now, you know, I will see you soon. And it's the first time you kind of see him break, because I think that up until that point, you know, he's been very affable, he's been very supportive of other people, he's been quite stoic in situations where you maybe would expect somebody to really break down, whether that's sort of in tears or through anger. And actually it's the phone call to his mum that really gets him, because a lot of them do throughout the film talk about, oh, I let down my gran by being this person, or I let down my mum, or I let down my kids. And there is this sort of guilt of, I'm not the person that those who love me thought I was. And I think that call in particular, I think because we don't get to hear what she's saying, we don't know if she's supporting him, we don't know if she's been hard on him, we don't know, you know, if she's praying for him or whatever it is, but we do see that he is completely burst by the whole process. Like, and knowing sort of later on in the film that he has been through this parole hearing several times over and got nowhere, you just think, yeah, he's completely on the brink here. So I thought that was a really beautiful sort of piece of sort of emotion or sort of acting from Colman Domingo. Again, obviously in a film where he is incredibly powerful throughout, but that in particular just really got to me, because he was just so, it was like he had nothing left kind of in him, which I think is probably the situation for a lot of the men, and why the RTA was so important to them, because there was, as you say, sort of nothing else. Is there anything else that you want to touch on for Sing Sing?
just the fact that you are made to work for this film. Nothing is actually handed to you, as you mentioned there with the conversation with the mother. You only hear one side of the conversation, but on several other occasions, you only pick up information, and it's crucial information sometimes, through an overheard conversation or the way somebody actually approaches somebody else. You really have to watch this film. This isn't a film that you can have on and have your phone out at the same time, because you will miss stuff. You will...
And even just like a wee flicker of emotion in somebody's face.
Yeah.
It's not just the verbal cues. It's the, oh God, did you see that look exchange between them? You know, that's all very powerful as well. So yeah, no doom scrolling while you're watching.
Yeah, pay attention to this one, because you will be rewarded.
Yes. And so would you recommend Sing Sing for those looking to seek it out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic movie. It's one that I knew very little about, and I would heartily recommend it based on the fact that I have seen it. I would definitely watch it again, because I think I would get some more out of it on a second viewing as well.
Yeah, me too. I would absolutely recommend it. Don't get me wrong, had Coleman Domingo not sort of been on the press tour, and had I not seen a few awards buzz about it, it probably would have been one that slipped me by, because a bit like you, it probably seemed a bit too formulaic. But actually having watched it and having appreciated the fact that, you know, this is a cast of real people from the RTA, I think it's a really great piece of cinema, so definitely worth seeking out. So on that note, we thought we would look at some of our favourite legal dramas. This genre obviously is super popular and encompasses like a whole range of different styles of films in different languages, sort of all around the world. So, John, what is your first pick for top 3 legal dramas?
My first pick is A Few Good Men from 1992, directed by Rob Reiner. Screenplay was by Aaron Sorkin, based on his play of the same name, and it has a star-studded cast. We've got Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, Demi Moore, Kevin Bacon, Kevin Pollak, Kiefer Sutherland and J.T. Walsh, and there's a few other ones in there as well. If you note as well, I think Cuba Gooding Jr. and Noah Wyle as well pop up.
Wow, that is that.
And I know. The story is of a couple of Marines who are charged with murdering another Marine by giving him a procedure known as a Code Red, where it's a punishment for someone who's not doing what they're supposed to do, or maybe they're letting down the platoon or whatever, or the company, sorry, not the platoon. And it seems at first like it's a bit of an open shut case, but at the insistence of the Demi Moore character, they take it to trial, and Tom Cruise, as the lead prosecutor, the lead defender has to defend the two Marines who are accused of this, and it becomes this bit of a conspiracy thriller sort of drama. You've got lots of courtroom action and lots of legal speak. You've got lots of like people sitting in rooms talking about the case and things like that. No car chases, but kind of everything. And it's just a really compelling thriller, obviously because it comes from the pen of Aaron Sorkin, who obviously did The American President and The West Wing, and various other things after that, but he's obviously best known for The West Wing more than anything else. So it's a fantastically tight film that's really sort of elevated by the fact that you've got so many good actors in there. There's obviously the very famous court scene at the end between Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise, which launched 1,000 memes, more than anything else. But no matter how many times you see the film, and I watched the film again yesterday in preparation for this, it's still a really good film, and it's got this cracking end scene as well, which excites you and then sort of tugs at your heartstrings right at the end of it as well. So that was my first pick.
That is a great first pick, and I see your early 90s Tom Cruise, and I raise you another early 90s Tom Cruise film. So I am going with the 1993 Sidney Pollack film The Firm, which is obviously based on a John Grisham novel, as so many legal dramas are. I could have had my pick of any of his films that have, or books rather, that have been adapted into films. So the cast here is Tom Cruise, Jean Tripplehorn, Gene Hackman, Ed Harris, Holly Hunter, Hal Holbrook, David Strathairn, and Gary Busey, because why not? So the film stars Tom Cruise as Mitch McDeere. He's this sort of super bright Harvard law school graduate, and he accepts an offer from a Tennessee law firm called Bendini, Lambert and Locke. And if you think that lawyers are sleazy, scheming, and conspiratorial, this is very much leaning into that vibe. There's lots of backslapping and whiskies and men in high back chairs smoking cigars. But basically, as Mitch he relocates his wife, they buy a house, and the company, it seems to be going great, but there's lots of conversations behind locked doors, and he's not quite sure about what's going on. A couple of FBI agents reach out to him and suggest that everything's not as it seems, and a couple of the associates in the firm are actually killed. And it's that point Mitch realizes that not everything at this firm is obviously what it's laid out to be. He realizes his house is bugged. He realized that he's been, followed, that he's been set up on different cases. And of course, you've got this glorious little speech from Gene Hackman at the funeral of one of the deceased partners, where he says, "Nobody leaves the firm. Nobody ever." And you're like, he might be a bad guy in all of this. So you do get fantastic shots of Tom Cruise running. And it's a classic, right? It's early 90s. It's people sort of at the top of their game, giving sort of teeth-gnashing performances. You've got great source material there. Obviously, the John Grisham books are bestsellers. And yeah, if you like a little bit of conspiracy theory, a little bit of Southern sort of bless your heart kind of threats, this is definitely one worth checking out.
Nice. Very good film. I have not seen this in such a long time, but I remember it fondly. It's a very, very good sort of legal drama. It's John Grisham, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was basically the first of his run of film adaptations. And they all commanded
and there's so
these
many
sort of
to pick from. Yeah.
I know, and they all were sort of bigger budget American.
And big stars as well.
Oh, yeah,
in them.
yeah.
Because I think a John Grisham adaptation at that point was seen as a sort of the thing to be in, because obviously you had like A Time to Kill, Runaway Jury. I think the Lincoln Lawyer as well, I think is one of his. I mean, there's lots of big adaptations.
Lincoln Lawyer's Michael Connelly.
Oh, is it?
Similar vein, yes. It's
kind of similar vibe of story.
Yeah, definitely is, yes. No, very good pick.
So your second pick?
My second pick, I Will Raise You, the 1992 thriller for a 1992 comedy based on a legal case. It's My Cousin Vinny, which was directed by Jonathan Lynn, stars Joe Pesci, Ralph Macchio, Marissa Tomei, and Fred Gwynne. In his last ever film role, he was Herman Munster in The Munsters.
I love The Munsters so much.
And he's really good in this. He's the judge. The plot of this is basically two young students, which one of them is Ralph Macchio, stop at a convenience store in Alabama, and while they're there, they shoplift a can of Coke, I think it is, and they get pulled over soon after by the police because they were the last people in the convenience store and the owner has been shot dead, so therefore they get charged with murder. They can't afford a lawyer, so they employ the dubious legal talents of Vinny, one of their cousins, who has never been in the inside of a courtroom, and he only just passed the bar after like sort of many attempts at failing it. And it's this sort of fish out of water type comedy, if you like, based around the case. And you have Joe Pesci, who rocks into town and he doesn't have a suit or anything to actually go to the to go to court, and he gets this one with the wee bootlace tie and everything. He just looks like some sort of rodeo clown. It's amazing. And he turns up with his fiancée Mona, who is so clearly out of his league. It's unbelievable. And they mount a defense on behalf of the boys, and basically it's this sort of whole court. The second half of the film is basically just the courtroom scenes where they're going back and forward, and it's like I say, it's like kind of fish out of water. They're trying a case in Alabama, and it's all these sort of good old boys and everything, and they think they've got this case completely sewn up because Vinny comes across a lot of times like an idiot. But there's like sort of nice wee twists and turns in there, and it is a comedy, but obviously these guys are sort of fighting for their life as well. Marissa Tomei is fantastic in this film as the gum chewing fiance, who is so much more than she is made out to be initially. She is like, the cleverest person in the room by far, and she just sort of tears shreds out of all these basically entitled men during her time on the stand as well. So yeah, really, really good movie. That is a comedy, but
yeah. No, I can see why you're going for that. And Marissa Tomei, I can always picture her so clearly in that film, like how she looked, and as you say, Joe Pesci as well, when he turns up with the wee bootstring tie. It's like if you were genuinely in trouble and that was your lawyer and he walked in, you'd be like, well, it's been lovely knowing all of you, but it's not going to go well. Oh dear. So my next pick is from 1994. It's a Les Mayfield. I feel like the 90s must have been the time for the illegal drama. A Les Mayfield film. It is Miracle on 34th Street. And hear me out, because I know this is a Christmas film. But the sort of second half of this film is Santa Claus on trial. So obviously we have Richard Attenborough as Kris Kringle, who I was utterly convinced was Santa Claus as a wee girl. And he has been doing really well at a department store called Kohl's, where Elizabeth Perkins is sort of the kind of operations manager there. And he's set up by a rival store to commit a crime, commit an assault, and ultimately he's on trial. Not on trial for assault necessarily, but for insanity, because he has given his name as Santa Claus. So it is up to the gorgeous Dylan McDermott playing Brian Bedford as his lawyer to bring this case to trial and to prove essentially that Kris Kringle exists. So what I love about this is that within the court case, we have a reindeer coming in as a witness, an army general who says he's never seen Santa's workshops. And even the judge's grandson is also brought in to sit on a phone book to sit in the witness stand. And of course, you have the awful Ed Collins, the prosecutor, played by J.T. Walsh, who's there to sort of say that Santa doesn't exist and he's horrible, and yet he still wants Santa to visit his kids by the end of the film. So there's obviously that really triumphant moment where you have Mara Wilson's Susan Walker, who goes up to the judge with her $1 bill, and she's circled "In God We Trust," and that's what sort of sets him on this path of realising that, well, if we can put God on the banknotes, then surely we can accept that Santa is real. So I watched this film every single Christmas Eve. I cry my heart out at it. I think Richard Attenborough is absolutely phenomenal in this film, and he's so sort of empathetic and just warm and wonderful. But yeah, it is technically a courtroom drama.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes, it definitely is. It fits in very nicely because the majority of it does take place in a courtroom, and there's legal back and forward in it. Yeah, so yeah, completely legitimate. Films can have more than one genre appeal, Yeah, it does work that way. For my choice, I have made a last-minute substitution. My third choice, I was going to choose 12 Angry Men, but I think I may have talked about that before. In ensemble dramas or something like that before.
Potentially, so, yeah.
I think I have. It kind of rang a bell as soon as I said, I was going to choose it this time. So instead, I will substitute it with one that you mentioned briefly there before, The Lincoln Lawyer. 2011 film starring Matthew McConaughey.
Is that how long ago that was?
Yes.
Jesus, yes. Okay.
I know. The timing is quite interesting, yes, because 2011 was an interesting period for McConaughey because he was coming out of his sort of romantic comedy period where every poster of him had either leaning against his co-star or leaning against a wall.
Yeah, exactly that.
And having said that, I caught about Fool's Gold yesterday, which was sort of prime rom-com territory from, which was quite interesting. Not a great film, but it was quite fun anyway. The Lincoln Lawyer is based on the book by Michael Connelly. It was directed by Brad Furman. Basically, McConaughey plays the part of Mickey Haller, who is a sort of a low-end lawyer. He tends to represent sort of lowlifes more than anything else. He has the title Lincoln Lawyer because he basically works out of the back of his car. He doesn't have an office. And he represents things like biker gangs and all this. But he is unexpectedly asked to represent a high-end client who is accused of a brutal murder. And first he's kind of like, well, why am I actually been invited to do something like this? Because it's so far out of his wheelhouse that he is a bit suspicious of it to begin with. It doesn't help that the client is played by Ryan Philippe, who is naturally a bit sinister anyway. Yeah. So there's like back and forward about whether you think he actually did it or not. And Mickey Haller is obviously having the same sort of thoughts. He's kind of going, well, you know, is this really, you know, is it legitimate or whatever? But then he has to put that to the side because a lawyer's job is to defend your client no matter whether they're guilty or innocent. A lot of the time you get that lawyers to say, I don't care if you did it or not. My job here is to make sure that you don't go to prison or even worse, or you get a fair trial. So it's one of these films that you're kind of kept on edge for most of it. There's a lot of nice wee comedic elements. Matthew McConaughey uses some of his rom-com talent still in this. He's very charming, obviously, and he has like his nice wee ringlet hair doing everything as well. But it's done in such a way that you're intrigued by the story because it doesn't give you an awful lot of clues about what's going on. You learn things at the same time that Haller learns what's going on as well. And it just makes for a cracking story. And, you know, it was a real surprise that there wasn't follow-up films to this based on the success of this. It was a very successful film. But it eventually turned up as a TV show on Netflix a couple of years ago. With
I was going to say, I thought there was this kind of spin-off thing.
But it's called The Lincoln Lawyer, but the first thing that happens in it is he gets an office. So but he still drives Lincoln cars and everything, that kind of idea. So that's fair enough. But yeah, it's slightly different in that sort of respect. But this is a cracking movie. I would advise anybody to kind of seek it out because it's one that's kind of been lost a wee bit, but it's a perfect sort of legal courtroom drama because it encompasses all elements of it. There's a courtroom element to it. I think maybe about a third of the film is actually the back and forth actually in the courtroom, and you see how Mickey Haller operates and how he prepares and all that. And it's an intriguing wee film. It's really, really nice.
I do remember going to see that in the cinema. I didn't think it was that long ago, right enough, but I do remember going to see it and being really impressed. I think this was the sort of the beginning of the McConaissance or whatever it was called, wasn't it? This was kind of his sort of first branch out. But yeah, that's a really great pick. And yeah, I actually kind of now want to go and watch that again. You just mentioned it.
It is on, I think it might even be on Netflix. If it's not Netflix, it's definitely Prime. It's on. In fact, it's on Prime because I saw it when I'd finished watching A Few Good Men. That was one of the recommendations.
Oh, recommendations, yeah.
So it's on Prime. So yeah, give it a watch. Your third pick?
So my last pick, if we're talking about awards season buzz around Sing Sing, I felt this was a nice tie-in. My last pick is Justine Triet's 2023 Anatomy of a Fall, which stars Sandra Hüller as Sandra Voiter, who is a novelist who is working out of her sort of mountain chalet near Grenoble. And we start off the film where she's being interviewed about her career to date. And if you've never heard a Calypso version of 50 Cent's Pimp, this is definitely the film for you because that is played on repeat for the first 10 minutes of the film. But basically, she's trying to give an interview. There's a lot of sort of domestic stuff going on. And ultimately, what happens is that her son, Daniel, finds her partner dead from a fall out the top window of this house. So quite a large part of this film is a courtroom drama where she is accused of murdering her husband. And what we get during this trial is, first of all, an absolutely phenomenal performance from Hüller, who is just incredible, who's operating about 2 or 3 different languages during this film as well. But we get flashbacks to arguments that her and her husband have had previously, which are some of the most cutting you will ever see on screen. Like, there's a line where she says something like, "I'm sorry your life hasn't worked out the way you wanted it to." And that's like a proper gasp for air moment where you just think that's a vicious thing to say to somebody. So you swap sides as to whether or not you think she's done this or not, because we get sort of audio playbacks, we get witnesses. Her son Daniel eventually sort of takes the stand, and interestingly, Juliette did not tell Huller if her character was guilty or not, just to play the way she thought kind of felt appropriate for the particular scenes that she was doing. So this is exactly my type of film. It's got a super ambiguous ending. Like, you genuinely don't know one way or another what has happened in that top window. And I just think that the performances are great. It obviously did get a lot of sort of award season buzz, but it's so worth seeking out. If you love a nice, like, wordy, like, conversational, sort of proper old school in the dock drama, this is absolutely one worth watching. The performances are incredible. And you get Messi the dog. He's playing a dog called Snoop in this film, but he was the award season darling of last year, and he is very much in this film, so worth seeking out for that alone.
Yeah, definitely. And it gives you an insight into legal systems in different countries as well, because it's completely different the way that courts are set up to the likes of what we're used to in terms of like British courts and American courts, which are quite similar. I suppose they're kind of in between, because you have a lawyer and a barrister here, whereas in America it's just a lawyer, and there you have all sorts. You have like,
it was like in the round theatre. She was right in the middle of a big row. It was bizarre.
Yeah, it's almost like this big performance piece, isn't it? So it's very strange. I suppose the more sort of dramas you watch from European countries, you get a flavour of it. But yes, that's kind of strange as well. But the whole film is just excellent. Really, really, really good pick.
Thank you very much. Well, if you have any sort of legal dramas that you want to share with us, or that maybe that you'd like to see us cover, you can let us know. You can find us on all of the social channels, including Blue Sky, at Moviescramble. And if you want to share your top 10 list with us, you absolutely can. You can email podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. But until next time, it is bye from me.
Bye. Bye. See ya.